For centuries, Miyamoto Musashi has been painted as a near-mythical figure, an undefeated swordsman, a master strategist, a man whose very name could send shivers down the spine of any rival. But behind the legend was a reality far more complex and far more human than the stories suggest. Musashi's life wasn't a straight line of victories and glory. In fact, his journey began with uncertainty, fear, and a desperate scramble for survival. At just 13, Musashi faced his first opponent in a duel that would set the tone for his reputation. But the truth is, that first victory wasn't the result of flawless technique or unshakable confidence. It was messy, brutal, and, by his own admission, more luck than skill. He didn't walk away from that fight as a prodigy. He walked away shaken, realizing just how close he'd come to losing everything. The world would later call him invincible, but in those early years, Musashi was anything but. As he grew older, Musashi's reputation spread, but so did his inner turmoil. From his late teens into his 20s, he relied on raw aggression and sheer willpower to win. He was fast, unpredictable, and intimidating, but inside, he was fighting a battle no one could see. Every duel was a test, not just of his sword, but of his mind. A mind that was often clouded by fear, doubt, and the constant pressure to prove himself. He won, yes, but each victory left him more aware of his own limitations. It wasn't until Musashi began to question the very nature of strength that his transformation truly began. He realized that brute force could only take him so far. The real challenge was mastering himself. His impulses, his fears, his need for validation. The myth of Musashi is built on 60 undefeated duels, but the man behind the myth was forged in the quiet moments between battles, when he was forced to confront his own weaknesses. And it was in those moments that he started to uncover the principles that would not only change his life, but echo across centuries. But Musashi's story isn't just about the duels he fought. It's about the internal war that every person faces, the struggle to rise above fear, to find purpose, and to build a strength that doesn't depend on anyone else. And as we peel back the layers of legend, what we find isn't a flawless hero, but a man who learned, through pain and persistence, how to become unbreakable from the inside out. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because the real test, the collapse that would force Musashi to rebuild everything, was still to come. The turning point in Musashi's life didn't come from a flawless victory, but from a confrontation that nearly shattered him. At the age of 29, Musashi faced Sasaki Kojiro, a swordsman so skilled and precise that many believed that he was unbeatable. Kojiro's technique was legendary, every movement calculated, every strike executed with mathematical perfection. In contrast, Musashi was unpredictable, almost chaotic, a storm of improvisation and instinct. The duel between them wasn't just a clash of swords, it was a collision of two completely different philosophies. On that fateful day, Kojiro arrived at the dueling ground with confidence, expecting a battle of equals. But Musashi kept him waiting, arriving late and wielding a wooden sword he had carved from an oar. To the onlookers, it seemed disrespectful, even reckless. But Musashi understood something Kojiro didn't. Perfection is fragile. When the unexpected happens, those who rely on flawless execution often freeze. And that's exactly what happened. Kojiro, thrown off by Musashi's unpredictability, hesitated for a split second. Musashi seized the moment, striking with a force and speed that ended the duel in an instant. The legend says Musashi walked away victorious, but the real lesson wasn't about who was the better swordsman. It was about who could adapt when everything went off script. But this lesson isn't just for warriors in feudal Japan. Fast forward to the present, and you'll find the same story playing out in 1,000 different ways. Take Marcus, for example, a modern professional who seemed to have everything figured out. At 31, he was a rising star at a tech startup, building a career that looked perfect on paper. But when the world changed overnight and his company collapsed, Marcus found himself lost. The skills that had brought him success suddenly meant nothing. The routines, the titles, the external validation, all gone in a single moment. At first, Marcus did what most people do. He tried to power through. He sent out resumes, chased after new opportunities, and clung to the hope that things would return to normal. But the more he tried, the more he realized that his identity had been built on a foundation that couldn't withstand real pressure. Without his job, without the constant feedback from others, Marcus froze. He made desperate decisions, doubted himself, and watched as his confidence crumbled. The collapse wasn't just professional, it was personal. He was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that skill alone isn't enough. When the world shifts beneath your feet, it's not your resume or your reputation that saves you. It's your ability to adapt, to keep moving when everything familiar disappears. Musashi learned this lesson on the dueling ground. Marcus learned it in the silence of his empty apartment. Both discovered that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about rebuilding when you do. And for anyone facing their own collapse, the question isn't whether you'll be tested. It's whether you'll find a way to rise, not by clinging to what you know, but by embracing the chaos and moving forward anyway. But what does it actually take to rebuild from nothing? The answer, as Musashi discovered, isn't found in grand gestures or sudden transformations. It starts with something much smaller, almost invisible, a principle that would become the foundation for everything that followed. After the chaos of battle and the sting of collapse, Musashi realized that rebuilding didn't require a dramatic comeback or a single heroic act. Instead, it demanded something far more subtle, a relentless commitment to microscopic improvement. This was the heart of what the Japanese would later call Kaizen, though in Musashi's time, it was known as Shugyo, the path of austere, disciplined training. For Musashi, this wasn't about chasing perfection or mastering 100 new techniques overnight. It was about choosing one principle, one movement, and refining it every single day, no matter how small the progress seemed. In the years following his duel with Kojiro, Musashi abandoned the idea that brute force or raw talent would keep him undefeated. He saw that every victory had been a narrow escape, not a demonstration of true mastery. So he changed his approach completely. While other samurai obsessed over learning new forms and flashy techniques, Musashi focused on the basics: timing, distance, posture. He would spend weeks, sometimes months, perfecting a single movement until it became second nature. This was transformation at the smallest possible scale, so subtle that even he might not notice the change from one day to the next. But over time, these tiny adjustments stacked up, creating a gap between Musashi and every other swordsman that no one could close. This principle isn't just for warriors. It's the secret behind every lasting transformation, even in the modern world. Marcus, after his collapse, was desperate for a quick fix. He wanted to land a new job, rebuild his confidence, and prove to everyone, including himself, that he was still capable. But every attempt at a big, dramatic change left him exhausted and defeated. That's when he stumbled across Musashi's story and the idea of Kaizen. Instead of overhauling his entire life, Marcus started with the smallest possible step: opening LinkedIn for 2 minutes a day. No pressure to apply for jobs, no expectation to network, just the act of showing up. It felt almost pointless at first, but he stuck with it. The next week, he read a single job posting each day. The week after, he updated his profile, one line at a time. These actions were so small, they barely registered, but they were consistent. And slowly, the resistance faded. What once felt overwhelming became routine. By the time Marcus sent out his first application, it wasn't a leap. It was just the next logical step in a process that had already begun. The same principle applied to every area of his life: tidying his apartment, getting back in shape, managing his finances. One tiny improvement at a time, repeated until it became effortless. Kaizen isn't about making a splash, it's about making progress so steady and so consistent that failure becomes impossible. The brain, wired to resist big sudden changes, barely notices these microscopic shifts. But over weeks and months, the results are undeniable. Musashi, even in his 60s, was still practicing the basics every day. Not to learn something new, but to refine what he already knew by just 1% more. That's how he stayed ahead, not through talent, but through unwavering consistency. If you're staring at a mountain of problems, Kaizen offers a way forward that doesn't require superhuman willpower or overnight transformation. It asks only that you move just a little every single day. The secret isn't in the size of your actions, but in their persistence. And, as Musashi discovered, that's how you rebuild not just your skills, but your entire life from the ground up. But even as Musashi mastered the art of daily improvement, he realized that progress without purpose is just motion. The next lesson he learned would force him to confront the emptiness that comes from winning without knowing why. For years, Musashi's life was a blur of duels, victories, and restless travel. He became a living legend, feared and respected across Japan. But beneath the surface, something was missing. He had mastered the art of improvement, but he hadn't yet discovered the reason behind his relentless drive. Musashi was winning, but he wasn't fulfilled. The victories piled up, but each one felt emptier than the last. It was only after his most famous duel, when he stepped away from the public eye, that Musashi began to question the purpose behind his path. He spent nearly a decade in the shadows, refusing new challenges and turning inward. During this time, Musashi explored not just the sword, but the arts, calligraphy, painting, sculpture, poetry. He wasn't chasing hobbies, he was searching for meaning. In the quiet of his solitude, he realized that true mastery wasn't about defeating others, but about understanding himself. The Japanese call this sense of purpose Ikigai, the reason you wake up in the morning, the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be rewarded for. Musashi may not have used the word, but he lived the principle. He wrote in his Book of Five Rings, "When I reached 30, I looked back on my past. My previous victories were not due to having mastered strategy perfectly." Musashi saw that he had been a talented animal, not a true master. It was only when he began to teach, to create, and to serve as a strategist that he found a deeper sense of direction. His purpose shifted from personal glory to something greater, passing on wisdom, shaping the next generation, and seeking harmony between his skills and the world around him. This search for purpose isn't just a lesson from the past. In today's world, it's easy to fall into the same trap Musashi did, chasing success for its own sake, following a path because it's expected, not because it's meaningful. Marcus, after months of applying Kaizen, found himself in a similar place. He was moving forward, but he felt numb. The jobs he interviewed for paid well, but none of them sparked any real excitement. It was only when he sat down and asked himself four brutally honest questions: what do I love? What am I good at? What does the world need? What will people pay for? That he found his own Ikigai. For Marcus, the answer wasn't another tech job. It was teaching, helping others build products from scratch, sharing the lessons he'd learned the hard way. The moment he aligned his daily actions with this deeper purpose, everything changed. He stopped chasing validation and started building something that mattered to him. The energy returned, not as a fleeting burst of motivation, but as a steady current that carried him through setbacks and uncertainty. Ikigai isn't about chasing your passion blindly or sacrificing everything for a dream. It's about finding the intersection where your skills, your joy, and the world's needs overlap. Without that, you can achieve all the success in the world and still feel empty. With it, even the smallest steps forward feel meaningful. Musashi's journey shows that purpose isn't handed to you. It's discovered through honest reflection and the courage to change direction when the old path no longer fits. And once you find it, every day becomes a chance to move closer to a life that feels truly your own. But even with purpose, another obstacle lurks in the shadows: the paralyzing grip of perfectionism. Musashi's next lesson would teach him, and anyone willing to listen, how to find strength in imperfection and move forward, flaws and all. As Musashi's journey continued, he encountered a new kind of enemy, one that didn't carry a sword or wear armor. It was the silent, suffocating pressure to be perfect. In the world of samurai, every movement was judged, every technique scrutinized. Tradition demanded elegance, flawless form, and absolute precision. But Musashi saw through the illusion. He realized that the pursuit of perfection was a prison, and that true strength came from embracing imperfection, not hiding from it. This philosophy, known in Japan as Wabi-Sabi, is about finding beauty in what is incomplete, irregular, and even broken. Musashi lived this principle in every aspect of his life. When he developed his famous two-sword style, Niten Ichiryu, it was considered strange and even heretical by the traditional masters. They mocked his unorthodox methods, insisting that real mastery could only be achieved through perfect form. But Musashi didn't care about their approval. He cared about what worked. He wielded two swords not because it looked impressive, but because it gave him an edge in real combat, even if his technique looked rough or unfinished. Musashi's art reflected the same mindset. His calligraphy and paintings were marked by quick, uneven brushstrokes, empty spaces, and deliberate asymmetry. One of his most famous works, Shrike on a Dead Branch, is striking not because it's flawless, but because it's raw and honest. It looks unfinished, and that's exactly why it's powerful. Musashi understood that life itself is never perfect, and that waiting for everything to be just right is a recipe for paralysis. This lesson is just as relevant today. Marcus, after finding his purpose, found himself trapped by perfectionism. He would spend hours rewriting a single tweet, postponing the launch of his online course because it wasn't good enough, and deleting videos because the lighting wasn't perfect. He compared himself to creators with massive followings and felt like an imposter. The fear of being judged, of showing his flaws, nearly stopped him from moving forward. But then Marcus remembered Musashi's story. Kojiro, the legendary swordsman Musashi defeated, was obsessed with perfect technique. He lost not because he was less skilled, but because he couldn't adapt when things went off script. Musashi, on the other hand, embraced chaos and imperfection. He used what he had, even if it wasn't pretty, and refined it in real time. Marcus realized that people don't connect with polished perfection. They connect with honest imperfection. When he finally shared his struggles, his failures, and his messy journey, the response was overwhelming. People saw themselves in his story. They didn't want a flawless hero, they wanted someone real. Wabi-Sabi isn't about settling for mediocrity or giving up on improvement. It's about starting with what you have, accepting your flaws, and using them as fuel for growth. Musashi didn't wait until his two-sword style was perfect before using it in battle. He used it, learned from every mistake, and improved one step at a time. Marcos did the same. He launched his course with imperfect slides and rough audio, sold it to a handful of people, and used their feedback to make it better. Each version was a little less flawed, a little more effective. If you're stuck waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect product, or the perfect version of yourself, remember Musashi's lesson. Perfection is an illusion. The real power lies in action, in showing up as you are, and in letting your imperfections become your greatest strength. Because when you move forward, flaws and all, you give others permission to do the same. But even as Musashi learned to embrace imperfection, he faced one final test, the challenge of walking alone and discovering the kind of strength that comes only from within. For most of his life, Musashi walked a path few dared to follow, one marked by solitude, not by choice at first, but by necessity. Born into a samurai family, he lost his mother early and was abandoned by his father, left to be raised by an uncle. At 13, after his first duel ended in blood, Musashi was cast out, too old to be a child, too young to be accepted as a man. He wandered alone, with no clan to protect him and no master to guide him. In a world where loyalty and belonging were everything, Musashi's isolation could have broken him. Instead, it became the crucible that forged his greatest strength. Solitude taught Musashi lessons that no teacher could. He learned that dependence is vulnerability. Masters die, friends betray, clans fall, and the world changes without warning. If your strength relies on the presence or approval of others, it can be taken from you in an instant. Musashi's journey was a relentless stripping away of everything external, status, support, applause, until all that remained was the self. He developed his two-sword style in total isolation, without a school, without students, without anyone to validate his progress. Every improvement, every insight came from within. When Musashi finally accepted a position with the Hosokawa clan at age 50, it wasn't as a frontline warrior, but as a strategist and advisor. Even then, he kept his distance, never fully belonging, always ready to walk away. And when he sensed the end of his life approaching, he withdrew completely, retreating to a cave in the mountains. There, in absolute solitude, he wrote his final teachings, the Dokudo, or the way of walking alone. 21 principles for those who would depend on no one. The first principle: never stray from the path. Musashi was clear. Once you choose your direction, walk it to the end, no matter how lonely or uncertain it becomes. Another principle: have no preferences. This wasn't about rejecting joy, but about refusing to be controlled by fleeting desires or attachments. Musashi's wisdom was hard-earned, born from years of watching people come and go, promises broken, alliances shattered. He understood that the only thing you can truly rely on is your own resolve. In today's world, the fear of solitude is everywhere. People check their phones hundreds of times a day, not out of necessity, but out of fear of silence. Social media offers the illusion of connection, but often deepens the sense of isolation. We chase likes, comments, and validation, measuring our worth by the reactions of others. But Musashi's life is a reminder that true freedom comes not from being surrounded by people, but from building an inner strength that no one can take away. Marcus, after rebuilding his career and finding his purpose, still struggled with this lesson. He checked his ex's social media, waited for old colleagues to reach out, and measured his progress by external benchmarks. It wasn't until he cut these emotional dependencies, deleting apps, stopping comparisons, and focusing solely on his own path, that he found real peace. For the first time, he worked not for applause, but for the satisfaction of walking his chosen road. Musashi's solitary path isn't a call to isolation or coldness. It's about building such solid self-sufficiency that you can choose to walk with others out of love, not out of need. When you no longer require validation to keep moving, you become unstoppable. You can collaborate, connect, and care deeply, but you are never at the mercy of someone else's presence or approval. This is the paradox Musashi discovered. When you learn to walk alone, you gain the freedom to walk with anyone, without fear of losing yourself. And in a world obsessed with connection, that kind of inner strength is the rarest and most powerful asset of all. But Musashi's ancient wisdom isn't just philosophy. Modern science is finally catching up, revealing how these principles shape our minds and our lives in ways even the samurai could never have imagined. Centuries after Musashi's death, modern science is finally catching up to the truths he discovered through hardship and solitude. The principles that shaped his life, Kaizen, Ikigai, Wabi-Sabi, and radical self-sufficiency, aren't just ancient wisdom. They're now backed by research in psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science, revealing why these ideas are so powerful and why they still matter today. Start with Kaizen, the art of tiny, daily improvements. Dr. Robert Mora, a psychologist at UCLA, has shown that the human brain is wired to resist big, sudden changes. When we try to overhaul our lives overnight, the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, flares up, flooding us with anxiety and resistance. But when we make changes so small they're almost invisible, the brain barely notices. These micro-movements slip past our defenses, becoming habits before we even realize it. Over time, these 1% improvements compound, leading to transformations that feel effortless. Musashi didn't know the science, but he lived the results. Daily, incremental progress that no opponent could match. Then there's Ikigai, the search for purpose. Researchers studying the long-lived communities of Okinawa found that people who have a clear reason to get up in the morning, something that gives their life meaning, live longer, healthier, and happier lives. It's not about chasing happiness or pleasure, but about having a sense of direction that pulls you forward, even on the hardest days. In fact, studies show that people without a sense of purpose are at a much higher risk for heart disease, depression, and even early death. Musashi's pivot from endless duels to teaching art and strategy wasn't just a personal evolution, it was a shift that science now recognizes as essential for well-being. Wabi-Sabi, the acceptance of imperfection, finds its echo in the work of researchers like Brené Brown, who has spent decades studying vulnerability and authenticity. Her findings are clear. People who embrace their flaws and share their struggles are more connected, resilient, and fulfilled. Perfectionism, on the other hand, leads to isolation, anxiety, and burnout. Musashi's rough brushstrokes and unorthodox techniques weren't just artistic choices. They were acts of radical honesty, a refusal to hide behind a mask of flawlessness. When Marcus shared his imperfect journey, he found not judgment but connection. Science confirms what Musashi knew. Authenticity is the bridge between people. And finally, the solitary path, radical self-sufficiency. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains that self-reliance strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, emotional control, and resilience. When we depend on constant external validation, our brains stay locked in a state of chronic alert, always scanning for approval or rejection. This leads to anxiety, indecision, and a fragile sense of self. But when we build inner strength, we become more adaptable, more creative, and more at peace, no matter what's happening around us. Musashi's life was a living experiment in these principles, tested not in a lab, but on the battlefield and in the silence of solitude. Today, science gives us the data, but Musashi gave us the map. The path he walked, one of daily improvement, purposeful living, honest imperfection, and self-sufficiency, isn't just a relic of the past. It's a blueprint for anyone who wants to thrive in a world that's always changing. But there's one final lesson Musashi's story reveals. These principles are powerful on their own, but when combined, they create a force that's almost unstoppable. The question is, will you use them together, or let them remain just words on a page? The answer lies in the final step. Musashi's life was proof that no single principle is enough on its own. Kaizen, Ikigai, Wabi-Sabi, and the solitary path, each is powerful, but together they form a system that can transform anyone from the inside out. This is the secret that separates those who merely survive from those who become truly unstoppable. It's not about mastering one idea and ignoring the rest. It's about weaving them together, letting each one strengthen and balance the others. Think about it. Kaizen without Ikigai is just endless motion. You can improve every day, but if you don't know why you're moving, you end up running in circles, exhausted but going nowhere. Ikigai without Wabi-Sabi becomes a trap of perfectionism. You might know your purpose, but if you're waiting for the perfect moment or flawless execution, you'll never start. Wabi-Sabi without Kaizen can turn into complacency, accepting your flaws but never growing past them. And the solitary path, if followed without the other three, risks becoming isolation for its own sake, not the radical freedom Musashi discovered. But when you combine all four, something remarkable happens. You start moving forward, even if it's just by 1% each day. You know exactly why you're moving, because your actions are aligned with your deepest sense of purpose. You're not paralyzed by the need to be perfect, because you understand that imperfection is the starting point, not the end. And you're not dependent on anyone else to keep going, because your strength comes from within. This is the formula Musashi left behind, not just for warriors, but for anyone facing a world that can change in an instant. So how do you put this into practice? Start by choosing one area of your life that feels stuck. Don't try to fix everything at once. Pick your career, your health, your relationships, or your creativity. Just one. Apply Kaizen. What's the smallest possible step you can take today? Not the most impressive, just the most consistent. Then, ask yourself the 4 Ikigai questions with brutal honesty. What do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? What will people pay for? Find the intersection, even if it's not glamorous. Next, give yourself radical permission to start imperfect. Launch the rough draft, share the unpolished idea, have the awkward conversation. Use the feedback you get to improve, not to judge yourself. And finally, cut off one emotional dependency. Stop checking for likes, stop comparing your journey to someone else's, stop waiting for someone to tell you you're on the right path. Build the kind of inner strength that lets you walk alone, so that when you choose to walk with others, it's out of genuine connection, not need. This isn't a quick fix, it's a way of living that compounds over time. Musashi didn't become a legend overnight. Marcus didn't rebuild his life in a week, but by applying these 4 principles, day after day, they both became unstoppable. Not because they never failed, but because nothing could keep them down for long. The real question is, will you wait for life to force you to change, as it did for Musashi and Marcus? Or will you start now, with one microscopic movement, and let time and consistency do the rest? The path is there, waiting. The only thing left is to take the first step. And as you do, remember, freedom isn't given. It's built one imperfect day at a time, by those who dare to walk alone, guided by purpose, and unafraid to start small. That's the legacy Musashi left behind, and it's yours to claim if you're ready.